Somewhere in the middle of El Salvador, deep in a jungle, there is a place that most people on this planet will never see. No windows face the outside world. No sunlight comes in. No letters go out. Families stand at home, staring at empty chairs at the dinner table, not knowing if the person they love is alive or dead. The government will not tell them. The lawyers cannot reach them. Even the United Nations has been turned away at the gate. This place has been called many things: a gulag, a concentration camp, a monument to justice, the most criticized prison in the world. But the people who built it call it something far more official: the Centro de Confinamiento del Terrorismo. In English, the Terrorism Confinement Center. Most people simply call it CECOT. And by the time this video is over, you will understand why almost no one who goes in ever comes back out, and why the question of what they eat in there is just the beginning of a much, much darker story. But first, we need to take you back to a country that was once so dangerous. Parents were afraid to let their children walk to school. Before we go any further, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now. Because the things we are about to show you are things most news channels will not touch. And you are going to want to be here when we release the next part. El Salvador is a tiny country. It is smaller than the state of Massachusetts. But for decades, it carried one of the highest murder rates on the entire planet. Gangs called MS-13 and Barrio 18 controlled whole neighborhoods. They taxed bus drivers, tortured rivals, and killed anyone who said no. Children as young as 12 were recruited. Parents buried their kids and then fled the country, hoping to find safety somewhere else. El Salvador was a place the world had largely given up on. Then, in 2019, a young, unusual politician named Nayib Bukele came to power. He wore baseball caps to government meetings. He posted memes on Twitter. He called himself the world's coolest dictator as a joke, or at least, that is what he said it was. People were not sure whether to laugh or be worried. What nobody could deny, though, was that something was about to change. In March 2022, after a single bloody weekend in which gangs killed over 80 people in 72 hours, Bukele declared a state of emergency. He suspended parts of the Constitution. He gave police and soldiers the power to arrest people without the usual legal protections. And then the arrests began. Tens of thousands of them. In a country of only 6 million people, over 85,000 people were swept into custody. That is about 1 out of every 70 Salvadorans. Rounded up. Gone? The murder rate collapsed. Streets that were once covered in gang graffiti went quiet. Salvadorans who had lived in fear for 30 years started going outside again. They called it a miracle. International newspapers wrote about the transformation with amazement. But there was a question that almost nobody was asking yet: where did they all go? The answer to that question was being built, right at that moment, in a jungle about 47 miles southeast of the capital city of San Salvador. Workers were pouring concrete. Soldiers were standing guard. A project so massive and so secret that the government refused to say how much it cost, who built it, or how many people it would hold. The financial details, the contracts, the exact numbers, all classified. Off-limits. Hidden. What they were building was CECOT. When the gates opened in early 2023, the images that came out shocked the world. Thousands of men, heads freshly shaved, wearing nothing but white shorts, were filmed being marched through the prison's hallways. They were forced to run. Guards shouted at them to submit. One CNN journalist who was there noted that the men looked visibly disturbed. Their faces showed something hard to name, not just fear, but the beginning of something deeper. The beginning of understanding where they now were. Bukele posted the video himself. on Twitter, for the whole world to see. And the world watched. Some cheered. Many Salvadorans celebrated. After decades of terror, watching the people who had made their lives miserable be led away in chains felt like justice. International leaders from Ecuador, Honduras, Costa Rica, and Guatemala began flying in to see the prison for themselves, asking how they could build something just like it. But a small number of voices raised their hands and said, "Wait! Slow down. Something is not right here." A former official from the United Nations whose job was specifically to prevent torture in prisons visited El Salvador and said that CECOT was being used, in her words, to dispose of people without formally applying the death penalty. That is a very specific, very serious thing to say. She was not someone who exaggerated. She had spent her career studying the worst prisons in the world. And she was saying that this one was in that category. Why? What was happening inside? That is where the food comes in. It sounds like a small thing, right? Food. We all eat. It is basic. It is human. But what they feed the men inside CECOT and the way they feed it to them is one of the first and clearest windows into what this place truly is. Because the food is not an accident. It is not a budget problem. It is not a mistake. It is a message. Here is what we know, confirmed by the director of CECOT himself, a man named Belarmino Garcia, during a tour he gave to journalists from CNN. He was proud to explain it. He walked journalists through the facility, showed them the cells, and described the meals in plain, direct language. Breakfast, rice, and beans. Sometimes a plantain. Sometimes a small piece of cheese. A cup of coffee or a drink made from corn called a toll. That is it. Lunch, rice, pasta, and a beverage. Dinner, the same as breakfast. Every single day. No variation. No choice. And then Director Garcia said something that made the journalists stop writing and just look up at him. Meat doesn't exist here. Chicken doesn't exist here. Special menus don't exist for anyone. He said it calmly, almost proudly. Because the point was never to feed these men well. The point was the opposite. Before Bukele came to power, El Salvador's prisons were infamous for a completely different reason. Inmates inside were reportedly eating better than many ordinary Salvadorans outside. Gangs ran the prisons from the inside. They had phones, they had money, they had power. They ordered food in. They held parties. The state had lost control entirely. Now the state wanted to make sure everyone, inside and outside those walls, understood that those days were over. The meal on your tray is the meal you get. There is no negotiation. There is no upgrade. There is no option to speak to someone about it. The food arrives at the cell bars. A plate is stacked outside. An inmate from a so-called trust group, a prisoner who has earned a slightly higher level of access, slides it through. There are no utensils. The men eat with their hands. Think about that for a moment. Not just what they are eating, but how. Every meal, every day, with their bare hands, through the bars of a cell they share with dozens of other men. A human rights expert who was asked about this said it plainly. The food of a person in state custody is a human right. There must be an adequate diet, not just to survive. Not just to survive. That phrase is important. Because what the experts were saying was that the food at CECOT was designed to do exactly one thing: keep the body alive. Not healthy. Not nourished. Just alive enough to still be there tomorrow. And if that is what they are doing with something as visible and documented as the food, something the director himself will openly describe on camera to the world's press, then the question you have to ask is this: What are they doing with the things they will not show? We are just getting started. Drop a comment below and tell us, do you think what is happening inside CECOT is justice, or has it gone too far? We read every single comment. And keep watching, because what comes next is the part they tried to stop a major American television network from airing. The cells themselves are something that reporters who have been inside CECOT struggle to describe without pausing to check their notes, as if they need to remind themselves it is real. Each cell is built to hold 80 people. But the warden, when asked how many people are actually in each one, gave an answer that told you everything you needed to know about this place. He said, "Where there's room for 10, there's room for 20 or 100. The furniture is metal bunk beds, stacked in rows. No mattresses. No sheets. No pillows. Just bare metal. The men sleep on that every night, under lights that are never, ever turned off. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the lights in every cell burn on. There is no darkness. There is no privacy. There is a toilet in the corner, out in the open, that everyone can see. The only thing on the walls that is allowed in some cells is a Bible. The men are locked inside that cell for 23.5 hours every single day. The half hour they are let out is not freedom. They are placed in hand and foot cuffs, led into the main hallway of their section, and made to do group exercises. Or they sit and listen to Bible readings. Then they go back in. The door closes. The lights stay on. There is no yard. There is no sunlight. CECOT prisoners are never allowed outdoors, not once. There are no classes, no job training, no library, no letters from home. As the public security minister of El Salvador said directly, "We believe in rehab, but just for common criminals." These men, he made clear, are not considered common criminals. They are considered something beyond that, something the government has decided does not deserve a way back. In June 2024, the reported population of CECOT was over 14,000 people. By early 2026, the prison director was suggesting the number was approaching its maximum capacity of 40,000. In a single building, in a jungle, in a country of 6 million people. And when rival gang members, men who on the outside would have killed each other on sight, are placed in the same cell together, something strange happens. They do not fight. They coexist quietly, without violence. Prison officials point to this as proof that the environment works, that it breaks down the gang structure. Critics say it means something different, that the conditions are so harsh, total, that even mortal enemies find themselves united by something bigger than their old rivalries. Shared suffering has a way of doing that. By the time you finish reading this paragraph, another meal has been slid through another set of bars. Hands reach through. No utensils. Rice. Beans. Maybe a plantain. That is all. And somewhere inside those cells, thousands of men sit under permanent light, with no way to call home, no way to know if anyone is looking for them, and no way to know when or whether any of this will ever end. Some of them have sentences of over 200 years. Some of them have not yet been sentenced at all. And some of them, and this is the part that will keep you watching, were never supposed to be there in the first place. Some of them have never been sentenced at all. And some of them were never supposed to be there in the first place. That is the sentence we left you with. And now we need to explain exactly what that means. Because this is where the story stops being just about a prison and starts being about something much bigger. Something that reaches all the way from a jungle in El Salvador to the highest levels of government in the United States of America. Something that a major TV network tried to stop millions of people from seeing. Let's start with the arrests. When President Buell declared his state of emergency in March 2022, the police and military were given a specific job: arrest gang members, round them up, get them off the streets. The mission was clear. But there was a detail that most people outside of El Salvador did not hear about. A detail that changes everything. The police were given daily arrest quotas. That means every single day officers were told, you must bring in a certain number of people. If you do not meet that number, you could lose your job. You could be transferred. There were consequences for not filling the quota. Now, think about what happens when you tell someone they have to arrest a fixed number of people every day, whether the evidence is there or not. You already know the answer. Officers began fabricating evidence. People were arrested based on anonymous phone calls. Some were taken in simply because of tattoos on their arms, tattoos that had nothing to do with gangs. In one documented pattern, a person could end up in CECOT simply because a neighbor who did not like them picked up a phone and made a call. Wikipedia. One call. No proof needed. No trial before arrest. No lawyer called. Just a knock on the door, and then gone. Human Rights Watch's America's acting deputy director described to CNN what his organization had found on the ground: working people, ordinary Salvadorans, children arrested and placed into legal proceedings so confusing and so stacked against them that proving innocence became almost impossible. I think about that word, children. Amnesty International documented cases where a single judge, whose identity was kept hidden, could simultaneously try up to 500 people in a single virtual hearing, with almost no evidence, and with defendants barely even aware of what they were being charged with. 500 people. One hearing. One hidden judge. Barely any evidence. That is not a trial. That is a number on a spreadsheet. A mother named Norma Diaz told CNN that two of her sons had been taken, one in April, one in December, both accused of gang crimes. She said, choking back tears, "They're practically taking my life. My children are not criminals. They're hard-working, good people." Her husband stood beside her. He said that each day he was consumed by one thought. Maybe they are not getting medicine. Maybe they are not getting food. Maybe they are not getting anything. He was right to worry. Because back inside CECOT, the food, the rice and beans slid through the bars, eaten with bare hands, was only the beginning of what people were not getting. Detainees do not have access to clean water. France 24. There are no blankets on the metal bunks. The lights never go off. And from the moment a person walks through the gates of CECOT, the rules of the outside world, the rules about fairness, about proof, about having someone fight for you, disappear completely. But here is the part of the story that, for a while, nobody outside of El Salvador fully understood. The part that changed when something happened in a country far away in early 2025. The President of the United States made a deal. The United States government agreed to pay the government of El Salvador millions of dollars to take in people that America wanted to remove from its own soil. Not Salvadorans. Not gang members with long criminal histories. The deal was specifically about Venezuelan migrants, people who had come to the United States, many of them fleeing danger in their own country, many of them with open applications asking for asylum. Legal applications. Filed by the book. The U.S. government sent 252 Venezuelans to CECOT in March and April of 2025. NPR, they were loaded onto planes in the middle of the night. Their families were not told where they were going. Their lawyers were not told. Even the courts, because yes, some of these men had active court cases in the United States that were supposed to protect them, were not told until it was too late. DHS agents according to a detailed report later, lied to the men about where they were being sent, and refused their requests to contact their families. Connect us. When the plane landed in El Salvador, the men had no idea what country they were in. Then the doors opened. One of them, a man named Endry, described what happened the moment they stepped off the plane. Officers from El Salvador boarded and said, "Either you get off the easy way or the hard way." When the men hesitated, the beatings began immediately, batons, right there on the plane, before they had even touched Salvadoran soil. CNN. When they arrived at the entrance of CECOT, guards made them kneel so their heads could be shaved. One man, who had a spine condition and could not keep his head bent low, was struck with a baton at the back of his neck. And then the prison director stood before them. The same director who proudly told journalists that chicken and meat do not exist in his prison. The same man who described the meal system on camera with a calm smile. He looked at the new arrivals and said something that the men who were there will never forget for the rest of their lives. "Welcome to hell, where you enter alive and leave dead." If this video is opening your eyes, do us one favor, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because most people will never hear this story told this way. And we are not done yet. The most shocking part is still coming. Inside their cells, the Venezuelans found what every person in CECOT finds. Metal bunks, stacked 4 levels high. No mattresses. No pillows. No sheets. Lights burning on the ceiling around the clock, every hour, every night, never dimming, never giving the body a signal that it is time to sleep. The only books allowed were Bibles. Sometimes prisoners were let out of their cells briefly to kick a soccer ball in the hallway or to sit and listen to prayer sessions led by an evangelical pastor who was also an inmate. The Nubian message: the food continued to arrive through the bars. Rice. Beans. The same meal again and again, with no utensils, with no choice, with no variation. One of the men later told reporters that the food tasted like soap, that the bathrooms were disgusting. Some of the men, finding themselves with nothing to do and nothing to use, started making game pieces from their tortillas, tiny handmade tokens from their lunch bread, so they could play dominoes in the cell to pass the time. The Nubian message read that again. They made toys out of their food, because there was nothing else. Because the only other option was sitting on bare metal, under permanent light, listening to the silence and trying not to think about how long this might last. The guards, meanwhile, were watching. Beatings took place during daily cell searches. A man could be taken if he spoke too loudly, if he showered at the wrong time, if he asked for medical treatment. Wikipedia. The reasons did not always need to make sense. The point, investigators concluded after interviewing dozens of survivors, was not punishment for specific acts. The point was to make sure everyone understood that the guards held total power, and that the men in those cells held none. There was a place inside CECOT that the men began to call the island. Its official description would not prepare you for what it actually was. The island consists of 6 small solitary confinement cells. Each one measures about 8 feet by 13 feet, smaller than most people's bathrooms. There is a cement slab on the floor, a bucket of water, a toilet, and a single tiny window near the ceiling, one small square of dim light, which is the only source of both light and fresh air in the entire space. One man described it this way: the island is a little room where there's no light, no ventilation, nothing. It's a cell for punishment where you can't see your hand in front of your face. Human rights watchmen were taken there for breaking rules, or for what guards said were broken rules. Sometimes they were taken there simply for asking a question. While in the island, They were deprived of food and water for hours. In some cases, for days. Guards came in regularly, not to check on them, but to beat them, Senate. One man described being struck in the stomach repeatedly, over and over. He said that when he tried to breathe, he was choking on blood. His cellmates could hear it and screamed for help through the bars. The guards responded by telling them they just wanted to make him suffer. Another man described being beaten for nearly 2 hours straight, every guard on duty taking a turn. Strikes to the ears, to the temples. Afterward, he could not see clearly out of one eye. On April 5, during a mass beating, one young inmate, described by other prisoners as a kid, was pepper-sprayed directly into his mouth. He fell to the floor and started convulsing. He was foaming at the mouth. Other men were told he had died. He had not. But they did not know that for a long time. Now, here is where something else enters the story. Something that connects CECOT to a newsroom in New York, to a television studio, to a decision made by powerful people in a country 4,000 miles away. In late 2025, the investigative news program 60 Minutes, one of the most respected news programs in the world with over 50 years of history, prepared a story about what was happening inside CECOT. A correspondent named Sharon Alfonsi had spent months working on it. She had interviews. She had testimony from survivors. She had photographic evidence that had been reviewed by independent forensic experts. The story was ready. It was scheduled to air on December 21, 2025. And then, the night before it was supposed to broadcast, it was pulled. But then something happened that nobody planned for. A Canadian broadcaster called Global Television accidentally released a version of the episode that still contained the CECOT segment. It went online. People downloaded it. They shared it. It spread across the internet so fast that CBS began sending legal takedown notices to try to stop it, but by then, it was too late. The story was out. France 24, and the world finally got to see what 60 Minutes had found. They saw the testimony of men who had been beaten from the first minute they arrived. They saw photographic evidence of injuries. They saw the inside of the island described in words that no journalist, no government official, and no prison tour had ever allowed the public to hear before. The segment eventually aired in a modified form on January 18, 2026, with statements from White House and government officials added to the broadcast. Human Rights Watch. The government's response. The Trump administration said the United States was not responsible for conditions at CECOT. El Salvador's government said the men were not mistreated. The men who were there said something different. The sicker and more injured we were, one survivor said quietly, the better it was for them. Human Rights Watch. And now, with all of that laid out, we come to the final question. The one that sits underneath everything else in this story. The question that nobody in power seems to want to answer directly. Of the 252 Venezuelans sent to CECOT by the United States, the ones whose cases were studied in detail by Human Rights Watch and a team of investigators, to 49% had no criminal record at all. Only 3.2% had charges that were violent or potentially violent. NPR nearly half. No record. No conviction. No trial. Sent to a place where the director greets you by saying you have arrived in hell and you will never leave alive. And they were the ones who eventually got out because of a prisoner exchange deal that took months to negotiate. The Salvadorans inside those cells. The ones who have been there since 2022 or 2023. The ones whose mothers stand at home staring at empty chairs. There is no prisoner exchange coming for them. There is no deal on the table. There is rice. There are beams. There are bare metal bunks, and permanent light, and a place called the island where the only rule is that there are no rules. And there is one more thing that this story has not yet told you. One final piece that changes how you understand everything you have just heard. A piece that involves not just the men inside those cells, but what happens to the families they left behind. What happens to the children? What happens to the countries watching from a distance and deciding whether to build their own version of CECOT? And what happens when the most powerful nation on earth decides that the rules it used to believe in no longer apply, at least not for certain people? That is coming, and it will make everything you have heard so far feel like the beginning. There is a 16-year-old girl in El Salvador named Jade. Every morning, she wakes up and feeds chickens on a small farm. She goes to school. She tries to focus on her lessons. And every single day, she hears the same thing from other kids at school: whispers, jokes, the kind of cruelty that teenagers can deliver without even realizing how sharp it is. They say her father is a gang member. They say he belongs in that prison. They say he got what he deserved. Jade holds a photograph of her father, Jose Roger Urquilla, and says, "It hurts me when they say he's some kind of gang member." Tick-tock. Her father is inside CECOT. She has not spoken to him since he was taken. She does not know if he is eating. She does not know if he is sick. She does not know if the lights are keeping him awake at night. She does not know any of it, because no one is allowed to tell her. No phone calls. No letters. No visits. The wall between her and her father is not made of concrete. It is made of law and policy and the decision by powerful people that communication is a privilege that the men in those cells do not deserve. Jade's story is not unique. Buchel's crackdown has left thousands of children across El Salvador without one or both parents. Some of them have dropped out of school to go to work, because without the father who was feeding the family, there is no one else. There are twins, a girl named Carmen and a boy named Manuel, both 17 years old. Their father was taken during the sweeps. Carmen cleans other people's houses to help her mother survive. Her brother works on construction sites. Carmen said something in an interview that no 17-year-old should ever have to say: "I have had to grow up too fast. My childhood was taken from me." She graduated from high school with honors. While working. While her father sat in a cell eating rice and beans with his bare hands under lights that never went off. Between 2022 and 2024, nearly 180 children lost a parent who died inside those prisons. Not transferred. Not released, died. 180 children who will never see their parent again. Not because of a court verdict. Not because of a long, fair trial where evidence was shown and lawyers argued and a judge weighed every fact carefully. In many cases, because of an arrest, a cell, a system that the human rights group that counted those deaths calls a silent crisis, one whose full impact, they warn, will be felt not for years, but for decades. Think about that word, decades. The children who lost parents in 2022 will carry that into their 30s, into the next generation. The children who dropped out of school to work are already behind in ways that are very hard to recover from. An entire layer of a small country's future, quietly damaged, in a jungle prison far from the cameras that filmed the first big transfers and then largely moved on. But while El Salvador's children were growing up too fast, something else was growing too. CECOT itself. By November 2024, the prison director estimated between 15,000 and 20,000 inmates inside those walls. By April 2025, He was saying the number was approaching CECOT's maximum capacity of 40,000. Oriate 40,000 people in one building, in a jungle, and the governments of other countries were watching, not with horror, but with interest. Politicians across Latin America, in Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, Ecuador, and Peru, have either implemented or loudly called for security policies built on the CECOT model. Oriate leaders flew to El Salvador. They took tours. They shook hands with President Bukele and posed for photographs. They went home and told their own voters, "We can do this too. We can build our own CECOT." In Ecuador, the president announced plans in January 2024. In Guatemala and Honduras, presidential candidates made CECOT-style prisons a centerpiece of their campaigns. The rice and beans sliding through the bars, the bare metal bunks, the lights that never go off, the island, the quotas, the arrests without enough evidence. All of it being studied and copied and exported to other countries as if it were a product that had been proven to work and was now ready for wider sale. And then the most powerful country in the world placed its order. If this story is making you think, share this video right now, because the things you are hearing are real, verified, and confirmed. And most people scrolling through their phones today have no idea any of this happened. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and keep watching. We are almost at the end, and the end is the part nobody talks about. When the 252 Venezuelan men were finally released from CECOT in July 2025, sent back to Venezuela as part of a prisoner exchange deal, the world let out a small sigh, a brief moment of relief. Some news anchors reported it as a resolution, a chapter closed, but for the men themselves, nothing was closed. A man named Juan Jose Ramos arrived home at his mother Lina's house and immediately broke down crying. He pointed at the peeling paint on the walls. He said he wanted to give his mother a better house. That had been his reason for going to the United States in the first place. Then he said something that stopped everyone in the room. He told them that inside CECOT, he had asked the guards to end his life rather than force him to live that way any longer. Human Rights Watch, he had asked them to kill him. Not because he was giving up, but because what he was experiencing every single day, the permanent light, the bare metal, the food through the bars, the beatings, the island, the not knowing, the silence from the outside world, had become something his mind could no longer hold. His mother Lina, back in Caracas, had spent those 4 months crowdfunding bus money from neighbors and her church $2 for a round-trip ticket to the capital, just so she could march in the streets and beg for her son's return. The anguish of his imprisonment, she said, did not let her sit still. Newsweek, another family in a small village in the Andes, had a grandmother who never made it to see the release. Her name was Marlene Ramirez. She had raised her grandson Jonathan. When he was taken to CECOT, she joined the WhatsApp group that the mothers of the detained men had quietly built, a group that grew to include relatives of 170 of the men, where every morning people sent updates and prayers. On May 18th, an announcement went into the group. Marlene had died of a heart attack. Her family said she could not endure the emotional stress of not being able to communicate with her grandson. She could no longer take it. She died waiting. Jonathan was still inside when his grandmother took her last breath. And because no calls were allowed, no letters, no messages of any kind, he did not know. He could not say goodbye. He could not thank her for raising him. He could not tell her he loved her one final time. He found out later, when he was eventually released. Standing outside those walls, blinking in daylight he had not seen in months, he was handed the news that the woman who raised him was gone. Now, Here is the final thing this story needs to say. The thing that brings all of it together: the food, the cells, the children, the families, the WhatsApp groups, the 60-minute segment that someone tried to bury, the grandmother who died waiting, all of it. Human Rights Watch's senior attorney stated it plainly. We are not aware of any person who has been allowed to leave after entering custody at CECOT. The LeSabre, not a single person, Salvadoran, Venezuelan, or anyone else, has walked out of CECOT through a normal legal process. The 252 Venezuelans got out because of a government-to-government deal, a swap, an exchange of human beings like trading cards between presidents. That is not justice. That is not a legal system working. That is two governments deciding the price of a person and writing a check. And the Salvadorans, the ones who have been inside since 2022 and 2023, the ones whose children are now working construction sites and cleaning houses to survive. The government says it has released around 8,000 of them for lack of evidence, but it says this quietly, without naming names, without explaining the process, without inviting anyone to verify it. An 81-page report produced by Human Rights Watch and a Salvadoran human rights organization called Cristosal found that the abuses inside CECOT are not accidents. They are not rogue guards acting alone. They are systematic, meaning they happen regularly, they happen everywhere inside those walls, and they appear to be tolerated, if not encouraged, by those in charge. A U.S. Senator from Vermont named Peter Welch read that report and said out loud what many people were thinking. It would not be an exaggeration to describe what is happening daily in CECOT as President Buchal's Abu Ghraib. Abu Ghraib was a prison in Iraq where American soldiers were photographed torturing detainees. It became one of the most damaging scandals in recent American military history. The images shocked the world. Investigations followed. People went to prison for what happened there, and yet here we are, with a prison that an American senator is openly comparing to Abu Ghraib, with a country that paid $6 million to send people there, with men who asked guards to kill them because the alternative was worse, with a grandmother dead in the Andes, with a 16-year-old girl feeding chickens every morning and holding a photograph of a father who cannot call her, and with a meal sliding through the bars of a cell. Rice. Beans. Maybe a plantain. Eaten with bare hands. Under lights that never go off. Every single day. That meal, that simple, deliberately stripped down, intentionally humiliating meal, is not just food. It is a statement. It says, you are here. You have no choices. You have no voice. The world outside has moved on. And we decide everything now: what you eat, when you sleep, whether you breathe clean air, whether your child hears your voice again. The question this video cannot answer, the one that no government has yet answered clearly, is simple. How many of the people behind those bars deserve to be there? Not whether the prison is effective. Not whether the murder rate in El Salvador went down. Not whether Buchel is popular. Those are separate conversations. The only question that matters, the one that sits at the very bottom of everything you have just watched, is this: in a world that claims to believe in fairness, in proof, in the idea that a person is not guilty just because someone said so, how many of the tens of thousands of people eating rice and beans through those bars right now were put there without enough evidence to justify it? One investigator who spent months working on this story said it quietly, in a way that stayed with everyone who heard it. It wasn't just those boys who suffered. There are mothers, fathers, wives, children, many, many people who suffered. Many, many people. In a jungle in El Salvador, 47 miles from the capital, the lights are on right now. They will be on in an hour. They will be on at 3 in the morning. They will be on tomorrow. And the day after that. And somewhere in those cells, a father is thinking about a daughter who feeds chickens every morning and holds his photograph and goes to school and hears other kids say he deserved this. He cannot tell her he loves her. He cannot tell her he is okay. He cannot tell her anything at all. The meal comes through the bars. He eats. If this video moved you, if it made you think, made you feel something, made you want to know more, then do 3 things right now. First, subscribe, because we cover stories that most people walk past. Second, drop a comment below and tell us what part of this story hit you the hardest. We want to know. And third, share this video with one person, just one, because the people in this story have no voice right now. But you do. And sometimes that is enough.